Hola, señoritas, ¿cómo estás? How we doing today? If you're doing good, excellent. If you're doing not so great, hopefully better after this official chapter review of One Piece. And not just any chapter of One Piece, a fabled chapter, a fable moment that we knew was gonna go down on screen at some point because the hype was too real in chapter 957 when Sengoku first mentioned this guy rocks so studly on God Valley that both Garp and Roger, future king of the pirates, had to team up to take him down. This is the first genuine fight that we have seen in the entire God Valley section of this flashback. And honestly, I ain't gonna lie to you, I do want more. But I know in 2027 or 2028, when the anime gets to God Valley, it's going to be stupendous. It's going to be the entire episode, Roger and Garp versus Rock is going to be crazy. So I'm looking forward, absolutely, to that moment in the anime, because they're going to cook massively. At least they should. But this chapter also has a big thing about hockey that I really was looking forward to the most, about what they would do with this hockey explanation, because there were two different takes on it via two different scanlations. And the one I wanted to be the case more so, what ends up being the case according to the official Viz Media translation of the chapter. Let's get right into it. Step by step, piece by piece. As per usual, we're gonna break this chapter down with its main components. Number one, of course, is gonna be the pace and chapter structure. Number two is going to be the character, which is very light today, honestly, the character section of the chapter. And then number three are going to be the story progression components for the chapter, where the majority of this is. And after those parts, I'm going to give you guys and gals a chapter rating. So first and foremost, the pace and chapter structure for this week's chapter One Piece. There's a lot of parts to it, a lot of parts you would think. So number one is you have the first part where you have the initial clash section between Garp and Roger versus Zebek. And then the sky split kind of leads to a transition where we do cut away to various parts. But it can all be coalesced to, let's say, part number two, because it's all a big reaction and sort of fanning out after the sky splitting and so on and so forth. And then also you have the Denden Mushis being used to contact Garp and Roger, and then they both say, we'll be back. So you can all see that's essentially all part number two. And then afterwards, when we have more of the fight between Roger and Garp go down, then we cut away again, and we cut away to Rayleigh. So right here's part number three. Then we cut to Big Mom and Kaido, that's part number four. Then we cut back to the fight for a second, that's part number five. Then we cut away from them, and we go back to Whitebeard and Polo Graham. That's part number six. Then we have Stussy and company, what's going on there, that's part number seven. So you can see by halfway through the chapter, we're already at part seven. Part number eight is Monkey D. Dragon's crash out from all the Marines on that ship, and then he winds up actually saving a few people from God Valley. Part number nine is that we cut back to Rayleigh and Skybergaban, and then part 10 we cut over to Saturn, quote unquote Saturn. I'm assuming Emu is embedded within his body somehow. He didn't blitz back to the Holy Land, but it's probably within Saturn somewhere, somehow. That's part 10. And then part 11 is going back to the Rocks versus Garp and Roger fight. So there are clearly a lot of parts in this chapter, very Wano Country-esque, because there are so many players that are involved and they're doing their own thing. Whether it's cutting back and forth from the main fight, whether we get to see what's going on with, let's say, Shiki and Silver Axe, with Dragon, which is how we get to 11 parts for this chapter. And I think that's a lot. For a One Piece chapter, that's a lot. Oda, I would say, normally has like 6 or 7 parts to it in terms of pace and structure. The structure is relatively okay, for sure, but the pace is definitely much faster than normal because we're just cutting to so many different sections. So in terms of pace and structure, I would say it's okay. It's not great by any measure or even good, because the chapter for sure absolutely been a lot better if we just focus on the fight itself. Let's say in a similar vein to chapter 1045, where it's just the fight between Luffy and Kaido, and more chance to show off what they can do in combat, considering how often do we get a chance to see someone like Rocks in earnest combat. The same thing going for Roger and Garp. You could argue in the future, we see them fight recently, let's say against Kuzan, fair enough, but at the same time, it's also in tandem with Roger. So more combo moves could have been used there on their part, more Rocks' techniques and so on and so forth. And then the other content could have been saved, let's say, for the next chapter, and like a little micro flashback when, let's say, the sky split, and then seeing how the island folks on reacted to that. So all that micro content could have been done rest of the next chapter. So once again, when it comes to pace and structure overall, I think it's okay, not the greatest, for sure could have been better for this chapter. Now when it comes to the character components for this chapter, very light this chapter, really light. Number one, the introduction to a new character called Polo Graham. Polo Graham, absolutely, positively, undoubtedly related to Mark of the Phoenix, probably his father. He actually scoped out Whitebeard, apparently was a big fan of Whitebeard, and he is the guy that we do see kicking Silver Axe in chapter 1162. After Polo Graham, number two for character is going to be Gil Bastar, who is a member of the Rocks Pirates, but also is in the Wanted one-shots. And apparently, Prono's ghost ability, before she had it, it was Gil Bastar who had it. So in the same vein as Gonzui and the explosion power that Mr. Five has, or uses Captain Kidd and Captain John with the metallic power, Gil Bastar has the ghost power. And this harkens back to his Wanted one-shot, where in his one-shot he could see ghosts. So Oda taking a page from that directly and actually giving him the power to utilize ghosts before Perona had that ability. After that, for character, we have two new moves on the part of Garp and on the part of Roger. Both these are multi-attack / Gatling style moves. For Garp, it's going to be his Infinitum Explosion, which seems to be a Red Hawk-ish type of attack, where there's somewhat fire on his fist, and then you see him fire them off in a volley, really harkening back to Katakuri's grilled mochi attack. That's number one. Number two is the God of Fire Ace attack, where you see roughly about, I want to say 8 or 9 different cuts that Roger does simultaneously to cut through rocks. And of course, in this case here, the God of Fire Ace attack, clearly harkening to, let's say, the sun's rays, where they kind of hit the wings as if, like, let's say a sun beaming through some sort of brush or some sort of like skyline, the sun's rays. And then of course that God of Fire referencing Nika in some way. So the importance of the flame aspect of the story once again being brought to the forefront here, being used to take down rocks. Now whether or not it's fire that's produced via Haki, we don't know, because right now we don't know if Haki can make fire. That's been a theory for a very long time, where, for example, Luffy's Thor gun, or let's say the Red Rock, let's even Sanji's fire, folks have theorized that in some ways these things are aspects of Haki. Again, not too sure, but we do see on occasion where fire is utilized with Haki. But that is it when it comes to the character section for this chapter. Again, very light. Nothing too deep outside, let's say, seeing the attacks, the new attacks of Garp and Roger, and these attacks are pretty damn powerful. Though they don't destroy a lot per se, because they're doing so much damage to rocks, you know they pack a lot of firepower. In fact, it's the critical mass of their Haki being used to take down rocks. And we'll get to that super soon, because now we need to get into the story progression components for this chapter. And for this chapter, the first thing I want to say in terms of story progression is that at the beginning of the fight, there's not much to glean from there in terms of story. The focus of the attacks themselves, the punch that Garp gives to Rox's face, the block on the sword that Roger does, they're very, very cool for sure, without a doubt. Very aesthetically pleasing. But more than that, it's the fact that we get to see, well, maybe not the fact, but we do get to see a Conqueror's Haki Sky Split, but it seems to be a solo Sky Split. That's what I can tell. Even after rereading the chapter a few times, I just don't see how Garp and Roger are really involved in the Sky Split. It seems to be Rocks and Rocks mainly, because we get to see the effect when Rock swings a sword, where they're very similar to when Roger and Whitebeard have their Conqueror's Haki clash, or when we see the Luffy and Kaido version of that in chapter 10-11. So again, I'm on the camp here that is a solo Sky Split from Rocks himself. Now, whether or not it's from Rocks' own Haki per se, or it's Emu who's enhancing his Haki, I'm not too sure. When you go back to when Dory and Brogy first transform into demons, when Emu is controlling Gunko, there is no mention of like amplifying their Haki per se, but their bodies are enhanced and they have undying bodies. But you're probably utilizing a lot more of your Haki than you normally are. And then we get to see Rayleigh and, you know, a few guys with treasure, but then also we get to find Gloriosa, who was MIA the entire God Valley flashback. We get to see her next to Gabon, and she wants to get on the Roger's crew ship. Obviously, she loves Roger, and also because the Rock's crew is probably done, and she wants a quick getaway for sure. So I think it's a big, I'm not gonna lie to you, I think it's a big shame that this is probably the only time we're ever gonna get real prime, or damn near close to prime, Gloriosa anything, and we've gotten really nothing for her outside of, yeah, she's hella hot, but also Shaki's harder. That's all we get for Prime Gloriosa. So once again, I'm hoping to the anime gods in the future, in 2028, when they finally get to it, we do see Toei add combat scenes with Gloriosa. Let's say Marines, other pirate crews are in the area that pulled up. Potentially, let's say, for example, Holy Knights. A lot of Holy Knights were shafted. If you go back to chapter 1096 and you see all the Holy Knights that are introduced in that chapter, the guy with the goat mask, the skull thing, who I call Bohemian Grove, nowhere. I digress. Then we get a cut over to Big Mom and Kaido. Now, this is very intriguing because this could be a retcon. Big Mom and Kaido have this conversation. They're going to part ways. Listen up, Kaido. You owe me for the rest of your life. You're gonna make good on that. Fat chances, says Kaido. It was finders keepers, Litten, and you lost. Just watch me. I'm going to create a new crew where violence rules all, which is exactly what kind of happens with, let's say, Rox's crew, in a way. I'll come collect it one day, and then he says, I'll be waiting to crush your spirits. When you go back to the Kaido flashback, there's actually a page where Big Mom is looking for Kaido, and it's on Pirate Island. It's after God Valley. A bunch of guys are saying, what? The Rock Sparks are no more. And then there's more yapping and yapping and yapping. And then you have Big Mom say a line right here. Where did you go, Kaido, you big rat? If Big Mom was on Pirate Island looking for Kaido, because in her mind, Kaido was probably somewhere on Pirate Island. Well, no. It looks like actually they had parted ways, and they understood that they were parting ways at the end of the God Valley flashback. That's what we could have gotten this flashback, 1165. So there are probably ways where you could spin it to where, let's say, for example, Kaido's gonna make a pit stop to Pirate Island, and then Big Mom gave chase, and then he already dipped by the time she was there, potentially. But at the same time, if you want to say it's retcon, I can't really deny that either. It kind of seems like Oda did retcon this moment from the Kaido flashback. After that, we get the whole thing with Marco's dad, Polo Graham, and Whitebeard, and we actually find out from Polo Graham that the one that took down the mountain in the last chapter, even though, you know, Rox was on the offensive, he says that it was Whitebeard. And Whitebeard, we kind of see him, he's relatively okay. So we do get confirmation that that feat was mostly, at least mostly, Whitebeard's feat. And then we do see Polo Graham kind of tag team along with Whitebeard. And then afterwards, we get to see Monkey D. Dragon. I don't know how this works out, but Dragon is able to commandeer an entire marine ship. Given the area, it's probably a battleship class ship. And he was also able to save other people that are on God Valley. And this is where, of course, his rise to infamy comes from. But the ideas of, you know, wow, Dragon finding the Deathroot power and flying away with its power, no. He just commandeers a ship, and he does it with a gun, which is kind of confusing in of itself, because you would think, hold on now, like, okay, he has this gun pointed at an officer, but at the same time, there are no folks in the area that can, let's say, stop this. You know, good guys with guns, like, where are they at? A. B is that this officer who's being threatened has no skills to deal with the pistol at all, or rifle at all. None, zero. Like, you don't have any hockey. Frick that. Tech High. Just go old school. Tech High, like, face tank it. Where's that? To me, I think it's kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie to you. I think it's really crazy that Dragon was able to commandeer an entire battleship, and they were able to listen to what he said, even though saving these people on this island would incur the wrath, that they found out, of the celestial dragons. I don't know. To me, that's kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie to you. Now back to the fight. We do see how Rock Dieselbeck loses, ultimately to a combo move of Garp and Roger. But the biggest thing here is the explanation of hockey. Now, when you go back to chapter 1045, Luffy is coating his whole body with Conqueror's and armored hockey as a means for added defense, attack power, things of that sort. In this chapter, we kind of see this brought back to the forefront, where Roger says, and I quote, "It all comes down to mass, doesn't it, Garp?" Mass, what do you mean? First of all, the color armament is a power that doesn't yield to devil fruits. And on top of that, I was writhed in the color of Supreme King. There's no way it couldn't have hurt him. Then Garp says, yeah, but he was guarding with Supreme King too, so they cancel out. And then Roger says, exactly my point. There's no damage unless we surpass that. When you think about Conqueror's Haki for defense, this could be a sign of a few things that we see in the story so far. A, Big Mom on Whole Cake Island. Remember how Capone and company had the plan to make Big Mom freak out and cry over the cracked Mother Caramel photo, which would weaken her body because emotionally she was very compromised in that moment. And now when we look back on the situation, The reason why there were fluctuations on her defense at that point in time was probably because she was so emotionally compromised that her hockey game wasn't on point, meaning that passively, Big Mom is probably exuding a very strong degree of hockey that ups her defense, even when she's asleep. It's stacked on top of her natural physique, but any sort of mental shock, whatever hockey in flux, and therefore weakness is exposed. In Wano country, via law, that because of the hockey of Big Mom and Kaido, he can't move them in his room. So their hockey is canceling out his abilities outright. So now we're getting more official context as to why it's the case here. Not actively, passively. It's just radiating from them. Kaido, he has reached a certain threshold where passively his hockey pool is so large that he's radiating hockey from him naturally that can negate abilities, and not just powers but other hockeys. And that's what Rocks is doing. That even the Conqueror coded attacks of Raj and Garp are being nullified by the passive Conqueror's hockey bubble of Rocks. So what he's doing is the same thing as Big Mom and Kaido on Onigashima, but it's dialed to a higher level. The next thing that's very important here is the idea of critical mass. So let me continue with the words of Roger and Garp. If it's all down to who wears out first, we'll lose. There's no way we can keep up with a monster like that thing. So you want to hit him with a critical mass of Supreme King? Exactly. Don't even think about whatever stamina you need after that. In the case you're saying we don't come back from this alive. If we can pull this off, all three of us will be down for the count. But if we miss, we're done for. So this can explain a few things in greater detail as to why they are what they are with hockey. So for example, Luffy and Dressrosa. Before Dressrosa, we have seen hockey be used in the story, but no one else had an issue with their hockey running out until Luffy in Dressrosa with Gear 4 Bowman. He is the first person to introduce a limit to hockey, and not only that, but a time to recharge that hockey. And then we see later on Whole Cake Island, the same issue, where after he goes Gear 4 Bowman against Katakuri and that doesn't work, he runs away because his hockey limit is now wearing out. So most people that use hockey in fights, they're not reaching their critical mass in the same way as Luffy is, but they also do have a critical mass. And depending on how you micromanage your hockey, you can last for either several minutes, several hours, or several days. So if this is 0 and this is the threshold, what has to happen is that normally he goes from 0 slowly of course of time, and then he can get to his threshold. But in the Gear 4 example, he's at 0 and then he goes whoop, he has to go back down, meaning not use any hockey for a period of time, and they get half hockey again. Normally, Garp and Roger, they would have their hockey be utilized over the course of the fight slowly but surely, so they have enough hockey left for, let's say, it moves. Critical mass means we're gonna use all of our hockey here and now. So we're gonna go from like 0, or let's say 4, or let's say 5, to immediately like 100. So that's where they're going now. That's critical mass. We're gonna use all of our hockey right here, right now. In one big burst attack makes the most sense. And then the idea of the mass component too, in terms of theories, could also add weight, like literal weight in some moments. Like for example, the idea of, let's say, making a black blade. Well, what if the actual black blade has permanent hockey mass to it because it is, let's say, infused by the wielder somehow, some way, but it's permanent. It's like, let's say, the hockey user permanently giving up a part of their hockey to put into the sword, some of that sort. This would also explain what was going on specifically in chapter 883 with Monkey D. Luffy versus Katakuri, and later on that same fight in chapter 895, where we see the edged mochi of Katakuri not only overpower the armor hockey hardening of Luffy in 883, but that even when he was in Snake Man in 895, the edged mochi was still overwhelming the Snake Man armor hockey. And then in the previous part of that fight, 883, Katakuri says there are even levels to the color of armament. So this could be that mass where you could argue in terms of hockey output, he's just outputting a lot more armor hockey into his fist, but in doing so, he's able to actually change the structure and the density potentially of his hockey to where it's way more refined, condensed hockey compared to Luffy's, even when he's in Snake Man. So the mass of the edge mochi is, let's say, more critical than the mass of Luffy's regular armor hockey and his Gear 5 Snake Man armor hockey. It had more mass to it, and mass being density times volume, you could argue that these attacks are just more dense. They are way more condensed, refined hockey, and with Garp and Roger, they're probably outputting maximum mass, maximum density for a way more powerful attack. So this I do think is a good attempt on his part to answer questions about hockey. Not things that we theorize, but official statements stated by Oda. So I'm gonna know, I would say for this chapter, I'm gonna give it at 8.5 or 9 out of 10 in my book. It's a very, very, very strong chapter. I think the last one was better, but I think that in terms of pace and structure, this one is not the greatest by any measure, but in terms of the fight context, in terms of story, it gets a lot done. It gets a tremendous amount done. So I would say it's still 8.5 to 9 out of 10 in my book. But let me know your stance on the subject matter at hand. If you enjoy your boys' video content, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and click on that bell to join the notification squad. I'm gonna catch you guys and gals on the flip side.
See you. Bye bye.